Hello everyone, this is Kat and welcome back to My Hero Academia Podfics. This will be the continuation of Yuuei Survival Guide. This will be part 39, chapter 39. Izuku goes home that night feeling distraught. He and Togata-senpai had reported Sir Night-Eye, and the man himself had been equally as surprised about the situation. Eri's existence had been a shock to everyone, but that had just made the whole Shie Hasaikai situation the more dire. They just can't leave her in his hands for however long it would take Sir Night-Eye to complete his surveillance of the Yakuza group. Izuku had made that point clear, but he didn't even care if it pissed off Sir Night-Eye. A child being kept by a villain is bad, but what's worse is a child being held by a villain who has ghosts of herself trailing after her. He hadn't known how to express this to Togata, Sir Night-Eye, and the rest of the heroes involved in the case, but he'd made sure that they knew that he was very insistent that they got Eri out as fast as possible. They'd been dismissed shortly after, told to return to school for the evening. Sir and his sidekicks had promised they'd be looking into Eri and Chisaki, and that they'd find a way to move the raid up despite it being unprepared to do so. Izuku and Togata had sullenly boarded the train together. Oboro had trailed after them until they had reached the train, at which point he'd waved Izuku off and left. The green-haired teen assumed that the ghost just needed a second to think, and that's proven right when Oboro's leaning against a post at the train station closest to Yuuei. The walk to campus is just as quiet, and they hardly even look at each other as they scan their IDs, are granted access to the school grounds. Izuku feels he's not really sure. He doesn't think he's really feeling anything right now. His head feels fuzzy, and there's a pit of dread in his stomach that he hasn't been able to shake since the ghost of Eri had trailed off after her alive self and the man Izuku assumes had played a role in creating the ghosts. Izuku moves on autopilot. When they finally make it to the 1A Heights Alliance building, Togata offering an empathetic pat on the shoulder and a smile that doesn't reach his eyes in the slightest before disappearing in the direction of the 3A dorms. Izuku stands for a second in the doorway of the dorms. The door had shut behind him, and he hears chatter coming from further in the dorms. He doesn't know what to say or what to do. He stares down at his shoes, clutching the case with his hero costume in it to his chest as his bottom lip wobbles. His classmates sound so happy, and a quick count of the shoes tells him that 8 of his peers are back from their studies. More will be returning, he knows, so he can't just stand in the doorway. He toes off his shoes, but doesn't release his hold on his case. He debates slipping past his friends and disappearing into his dorm room, but the thought sends a spark of anxiety through his chest. He doesn't know why. He turns to the stairs anyways, slipping into the stairwell without alerting anyone of his presence. He's not sure he's ever felt so disassociated, and Oboro trails a step or so behind him, but doesn't say anything. He doesn't get too close, and if Izuku couldn't feel the chill of the entity, he wouldn't have even noticed his ghostly shadow. The apartment's unlocked, which Izuku could cry at. If it had been locked, he would have abandoned the idea of coming up here. He has the key in his pocket, knows it's there, but he doesn't have the energy to unlock the door himself. He pushes the door open and slips inside, biting his bottom lip as his eyes water. He doesn't make it as far into the apartment as he had in the dorms without being noticed. His guardians are 2 pro-heroes, so that's probably a given, right? Oh, hey, Sunshine! Hisashi greets brightly after just a quick glance thrown over his shoulder to identify. It's no surprise Hisashi's able to place him even when he's not entirely visible in the doorway. Even though he probably hadn't seen Izuku, it's not too hard to figure out who'd be returning so early, especially since Shota's supposed to be training with Hitoshi this evening in hopes of getting him to the point where he's ready to participate in the provisional license exam being held in Tokyo in the upcoming weeks. He wasn't to a point where either Shota or Hitoshi himself felt confident with his ability to pass when Todoroki and Kacchan had gone to the remedial lessons and the exam for their licenses. It wouldn't be fair to throw him into that just yet, and the Tokyo exam seems like the best option all around. He'll be participating in the second half of the internships if all goes according to plan. The faster Hitoshi's able to intern at agencies like the rest of the class, the better it'll be. Izuku would hate for his friend to be stuck behind everyone else like he'd been when he first received One for All. It sucked. Izuku draws himself away from the thoughts of his friend, realizing he hadn't responded to Hisashi. He hadn't even opened his mouth, and when he tries to now, he finds he can't. He feels hollow. He wants to reply to Hisashi, but he doesn't think that he can right now. He has no energy, and what little there is being used to shove down the tears threatening to fall. Izuku has no idea how he'd even managed to make it up and into the upstairs apartment. He thinks that he was moving solely on autopilot after he and Togata-senpai had split up outside the 1A Heights Alliance building. Izuku's not sure why he even trekked all the way upstairs when he could have just gone to his own dorm room. It makes no sense to him, but here he is. Izashi's turned toward the sink, scrubbing at root vegetables. There's also a box of instant curry cubes on the counter, as well as a package of chicken, so Izuku assumes that's what's for dinner. They haven't had a curry in a while, but Izuku can't manage to feel any excitement. The thought of eating makes him queasy. He can't feel anything but guilt, suffocating and pitting in his stomach, a fierce anxiety that makes him feel physically sick. All he can think about is that little girl, Eri. Eri, who'd returned to her captor to protect them from Chisaki and Eri's ghosts, and echoes of an abused little child. He can only theorize why there would be ghosts of a living little girl, and everything he thinks makes his stomach churn harder. He swallows, pushing down the image of the little girl cowering just out of arm's reach, eyes wide with fear. Izuku wonders how Hizashi's first day of interning with Kaminari and Jiro had gone, and decides it was probably better than his own, considering Izuku is seconds away from crying. And Hizashi's humming cheerily to himself as he waits for a reply from Izuku. Izuku realizes he must take too long when Hisashi glances over his shoulder again, scrubbing at a potato as he speaks. "So, how was your day? First official patrol, yeah? How was it? Toga to show you the ropes and all that jazz?" Izuku steps into the kitchen silently, feet dragging as he beelines toward his guardian. Izuku reaches Hisashi just as the man is turning fully to look at him, eyebrow cocked in confusion at Izuku's silence. Izuku doesn't hesitate to step right up to Hisashi as the man turns to him, pushing himself against his guardian and burying his face in his hero's shirt. Hisashi stills for a second, not tense but unsure at the suddenness, and then his arms are wrapping around Izuku's shoulders gently. Izuku sniffles, wrapping his own arms around his guardian and grabbing fistfuls of the back of Hisashi's shirt just for something to do with his clenching hands. He presses his face even further into Hisashi's chest when the man doesn't push him away. Not that he thinks Hisashi would. "Sweetheart," Hisashi coos softly, hand dragging a light line up and down Izuku's shoulder. As he returns the hug, the man's hands are wet from the sink, but Izuku doesn't care. "You okay?" Izuku still doesn't speak, shaking his head and pressing his nose into the fabric of Hisashi's shirt, and Hisashi must take the lack of an answer of what it is, and one of his hands comes up to cup the back of his head, and he hums lightly. "That's okay, honey. Not feeling like talking, huh? That's perfectly fine," Hisashi mumbles out, leaning down to press a kiss to the top of Izuku's head. "Why don't we go sit down on the couch, yeah? I bet you're pretty tired, and I could totally use some quiet time, too. Come on, sunshine." Izuku lets himself be guided into the living room, following Hisashi's lead entirely. He moves numbly, and his heart is thudding in his chest. He's faintly aware of Oboro trailing behind them. The ghost had been oddly quiet since they'd left the alleyway without Eri. Hisashi plops down on the couch first, and Izuku takes just a second to stare blankly at him. Hisashi pats a spot beside him, and that's all it takes for Izuku to all but fall over, instantly curling into Hisashi's waiting arms. He pulls his knees up so that he's almost laying in a fetal position, cuddling into Hisashi without really meaning to. Fingers card through his curls, and Hisashi's thumb, where his other arm is settled along Izuku's shoulder securely, drags comforting lines back and forth along his shoulder. Izuku curls even closer as he sinks into the comfort and squeezing his eyes shut. Hisashi shifts, settling into the couch and pulling Izuku closer until he's completely curled into his guardian's side. The man's hand doesn't stray from his curls, carding lightly and even carefully tousling the stray curls. Soft mumbles fill the room, and it takes an embarrassingly long amount of time for Izuku to realize that Hisashi had turned the television on. The white noise and gentle fingers in his hair, and one on his back, it lulls him. He doesn't even know when he starts crying, but Hisashi's fingers don't stop carding through, and he's lightly hushing Izuku, and he doesn't know why he can't keep it together. Hisashi doesn't say anything or ask why Izuku's so upset. He just holds him while he cries and offers quiet affirmations. He thinks of helpless little Eri, all alone with someone like Chisaki. He thinks of those ghosts of a terrified little girl who'd all but pleaded for help, scared and helpless and fading away, ghosts who shouldn't even exist but do. He cries for a while, time a foreign concept to him, as he keeps his face buried in Hisashi's shirt. The blonde says nothing, but doesn't try to console him or ask what's wrong, just sits with him and comforts him. His loud cries eventually settle into sobs, and sobs will settle into sniffles before Izuku stutters through hiccuping breaths. He doesn't know when he quiets down. The room falls nearly silent. Soft murmuring of the television is the only noise to be heard beside Izuku's stuffy breaths, and Hisashi continues petting through his hair, and Izuku doesn't so much as move. He doesn't know how much time passes until the door opens again. He's in that weird state of half awake and half asleep. But the sound of the apartment door opening has him curling further into himself. Hisashi's hand is stilling in his hair for the first time since they'd settled on the couch. He doesn't take away the grounding hand, just pauses his movements. "Hisashi," comes Shota's voice from the Genkin, and Izuku hears the clatter of his boots hitting the floor, his voice sounding distant. "Have you heard from Izuku? Toshi and I have both been texting him, but he hasn't responded to either of us. I didn't see him downstairs, but I know that he and Tokuda should have returned by now." Izuku tucks his face closer to Hisashi. Phone in his pocket suddenly weighing him down, he feels even more guilty than he already did, knowing that he'd been ignoring his guardian and friend. He hadn't even realized. He'd turned it to silent before patrol, since it would be a distraction otherwise. He hadn't been in the mood to look at the small device on either the train ride back to school or the walk through the school grounds. He and Tokuda had hardly said a word to each other between them after leaving Sir Nida's office. "Yeah, he's been up here with me," Hisashi replies quietly, just loud enough for Shota to hear in the Genkin, and it's weird hearing Hisashi so quiet, trying not to disturb the blanket of tranquility that had formed in the time since they'd settled on the couch. How long has it been? Izuku squeezes his eyes shut as Hisashi's nails scratch lightly against his scalp. The man continues as footsteps draw near. "We've just been chillin' for a bit, you dig?" "Chilling?" Shota asks, voice sounding a lot closer now, and Hisashi shifts enough that Izuku suspects he's angling himself to look at Shota, and Izuku knows he should be opening his eyes and acknowledging his other guardian, but he just can't seem to make it happen. "Oh." "Listener had a rough day, I suspect," Hisashi says softly, hand flattening on top of Izuku's head. "Hasn't been very talkative, but there's nothing wrong with that, is there, Izuku?" A second palm settles on his head, just below his hairline. The touch is just as soft as Hisashi's, but the hand is more calloused than Hisashi's are. Izuku knows it's years of capture weapon work that's toughened up his guardian's hands. The feather-like hand pushes up into his hair gently, pulling his bangs and stray curls out of his face as it goes. Izuku finally finds the motivation to sliver his eyes open, blinking owlishly at Shota, who's crouched by the couch. He's still wearing his capture weapon and costume, hair tied up in a messy bun like it always is when he's working on capture weapon control with Hitoshi. "Hey, you with us, sweetheart?" Hisashi asks, fingers trailing back through his bangs. "It's okay if you still need some time. That's completely fine. Take all the time you need, yeah? No need to rush things." Shota pulls his hand back, but doesn't make any move towards standing. Izuku glances up at Hisashi before looking over at Shota. He peers faintly around the underground hero, spotting Oboro, who'd been uncharacteristically quiet, knees drawn to his own chest with his forehead pressing to his knees, face hidden away. Maybe leaving Eri had been harder for him than he'd let on. Izuku still can't help but feel annoyed that Tokuda and Oboro had been so insistent that they withdraw, but he understands why. Just doesn't mean it's right at all. He'd seen the fear, not just in Eri's eyes, but in the eyes of all those ghosts as well. Izuku draws in an unsteady breath and nods slowly in reply. Hisashi's fingers have migrated down, dragging light nails down Izuku's spine. Izuku shivers as they trail over his uniform. It's distantly familiar. Maybe something his mom used to do, but he can't pinpoint any specific moment, and it's just feeling nice, calming. Shota shifts, and Izuku can see it out of the corner of his eye. The man stands just enough that he can sit on the coffee table next to them, studying Izuku with concern. Izuku blinks red, raw eyes shut before refocusing on his guardian. Shota glances over at Hisashi before looking back at Izuku, expression softening. "How are you feeling?" He still can't find his voice. He sniffles and unfurls a hand to drag along his eyes. His eyes hurt, but he knows it's just from crying. He lifts a shoulder into a half-hearted shrug and swallows hard. "That's okay," Hisashi tells him. "Nothing wrong with that. We all have bad days, yeah?" Izuku manages another little nod, squeezing his eyes shut. There's an almost overwhelming amount of understanding in this room. He's not used to it. It's overwhelming, but it's also exactly what he'd been craving when he trekked up the stairs to the apartment. Neither guardian seems to mind just sitting with Izuku. Hisashi's arm is still around him, twirling a single green curl around his finger, while Shota's leaned forward enough that he's able to set his hand on Izuku's folded-up knee, thumb stroking lightly. It's just enough contact that he doesn't feel overcrowded, but he still feels completely safe and content. "You feeling up to talking, kiddo?" Shota's voice is the one that breaks the silence. Izuku looks at him, thinking the question over before offering a tiny nod. The man returns a nod of his own, clearly thinking his next question over. Was this something that Sir Night-Eye did? No. Izuku lets out a humorless laugh, voice hoarse as he wipes at his eyes again. Sir was very professional. He wasn't the problem. It was something else, something... Izuku swallows, unsure of how to continue. Something else. He doesn't even know if he's allowed to tell his guardians. They're both pros, sure, but that doesn't mean anything if the mission's confidential, which it is. Just because they're both pros doesn't mean that they're privy to other agencies and hero cases. Shota studies him before seeming to deem that the truth. The man blinks, leaning back onto his hands, and Shota scans Izuku up and down before frowning. If it wasn't Sir Night-Eye, then did something happen on patrol? He offers yet another unhelpful shrug, looking away so his expression can't give anything away. He doesn't know how to answer without answering. He's sure that he'll only put himself further in Sir Night-Eye's bad books if he spills confidential information with uninvolved heroes. It must give away more than he thought, because Shota and Hisashi are exchanging a look. Was it something we can help with? Hisashi asks, quietly, as Izuku shifts enough that he's now sitting up. Or something, confidential? Confidential, I think. Izuku croaks out, leaning against the back of the couch and tugging his knees up to his chest. I don't know. I don't know. Shota opens his mouth to say something, but his phone's ringing and it cuts him off. The pro pauses, reaching to dig a cell phone out of his utility belt pouch. He stares at the incoming call with an odd look on his face before standing and answering with a gruff, Eraserhead. The man shoots Izuku and Hisashi one last look, phone pressed to his ear before he's turning and walking toward the bedrooms, without a word to either of them. It's not the first time either bro has done something like this. Izuku understands the secrecy when it comes to their hero jobs. It must just be something confidential and important. Izuku feels tears spring to his eyes, palming hard at his eye sockets to wipe them away before they can streak down his cheeks. He tears his gaze from the direction that Shota just disappeared and looks up at Hisashi instead. He's not surprised to see his guardian watching him with a soft, concerned look. Izuku lets out another humorless laugh, rubbing his eyes dry again. I don't know why I'm so upset. This is part of the job. I signed up for this. I just can't... I know we did everything right, but still, I feel awful. I'm sorry. Shh. Hisashi pets his hair. It's okay. This is part of heroics, kiddo. You're allowed to be overwhelmed. Things are going to get overwhelming. Do you think that we never have been in states like this? Trust me, Sunshine. When Sho and I were first starting out, things were hard. It's a lesson every young hero learns at some point or another. You lose people, and sometimes you can't help everyone no matter how hard you try. There'll be times when things don't go according to plan. There's nothing wrong with being emotional after a hard day. I'm just glad you're not bottling things up. You're doing just fine, all right? Don't be sorry. Izuku shifts enough that he can hug Hisashi, and he relaxes into the embrace when Hisashi returns the hug just as fiercely. He's calmed down some. The quiet evening with Hisashi had been just what he needed, and he no longer feels like he's about to start sobbing. He doesn't feel great, but he's definitely cried out. They sit for just a little while longer until Izuku's the one who breaks the embrace. He pulls away and rubs at his eyes again, managing a little smile in Hisashi's direction. The man returns something just as soft. Feeling any better? Hisashi cocks his head to the side in question. I know hero work and patrols can be rough, especially when you're first starting out, but don't let it deter you, okay? You'll be a great hero, you dig? You'll have bad days and bad patrols, but you'll also have good days and good patrols. Izuku gives a shy nod, looking away as Hisashi finally pushes himself up with a toothy smile. Attaboy. His guardian coos lightly, ruffling through Izuku's curls. I'm gonna go grab you some water, and then I'll get started on dinner. Think you'll be okay alone for a bit? Yeah, Izuku nods. Thank you. I'll be okay. I feel a bit better now. Thank you for... No thanks needed, Sunshine. Hisashi cuts him off lightly, sporting a grin. Seriously, don't hesitate to come to me or Sho if you need it, yeah? And never think that you need to thank us for helping you through stuff like this. We wanted you to trust us, to come to us when you're upset or hurt or sick, whenever you need us. I'm so proud of you for coming to me when you needed it today. You just remember we'll always be here for you, all right, sweetheart? I will. Izuku bows his head, hoping to hide his flushed cheeks. He doesn't know if it's from crying or Hisashi being so attentive to him. Thank you. Hisashi huffs a laugh, and it takes Izuku just a second to realize that he's still thanking the man after he just told him that he doesn't need to. Izuku blows out his own amused breath, dropping his attention to his lap. Hisashi disappears into the kitchen, only to return a second later with a glass of water. He hands it to Izuku and chances another ruffle of his curls before parting. "You good with chicken curry for dinner? It'll be a bit of a late one, but we're no strangers to late dinners around here. I bet you worked up an appetite on patrol, huh?" Hisashi had paused in the kitchen doorway, peeking back into the room. There's something so touching about the attention to detail. Hisashi is so clearly offering to alter his plans for Izuku if he'd like, if it would help him feel better, but Izuku just nods with a small smile. "Sounds good." Izuku stares into the water as his guardian retreats back to the kitchen again, the sound of the faucet turning back on, which is swiftly followed by quick chops of a knife on a cutting board. He is lost in thought as he stares down at his water. He does feel better after sitting with Hisashi, but it still doesn't sit right. He still doesn't know if he did the right thing. She'd been so close, within arm's reach, and they'd still left without her. This is the kind of stuff that no one ever talks about when being a hero. The isolation of it. He has this knowledge that there's this desperate little girl somewhere out there that needs help, a little girl who's in a dangerous situation where something is being done to her. He'd had her in his arms, and he'd still lost her. She's out there, and he doesn't even know if he's allowed to say anything. If he's allowed to tell his guardians why the day was so upsetting. This is suffocating, but he can't say anything. Who doesn't already know or seek comfort in conversation because that's a breach of agency confidentiality. He's supposed to just shoulder this alone. The circle of knowledge is small, and Izuku knows that he can't break it. Izuku can't afford to dig himself any further into a hole when it comes to Sir Night-Eye, but he also can't imagine suffering through this and not being able to talk about it. How are heroes supposed to do this? How are people supposed to do this? Izuku startles when a hand touches his shoulder. He knows he probably shouldn't. He's in a locked apartment with his two hero guardians, but he's just so lost in thought that it happens. His water sloshes as he jumps, but it doesn't spill. He barely has a second to turn and see which guardian is with him when a blur of black hair, Shota then, is rounding the couch and pulling him into a hug. Izuku awkwardly clutches the water as he melts into the embrace so easily. He doesn't know how both of his guardians have the power to just make him feel so at ease. "That was Centipeter on the phone," Shota tells him softly. "He was calling to let me know that the raid on the Shie Hisaikai group has been moved up due to unforeseen circumstances. Apparently 2 student interns accidentally made contact with the target and discovered that Shizuki has a child with him. It's crucial that we raid as soon as possible." And the tears are back. He knows. Shota knows about Eri. She was so scared. Izuku clutches the water to his chest with one hand and swings the other to desperately clutch at Shota. He buries his face in the man's neck as the poorly constructed dam of his emotions, they all crumble down. Fingers clasped around a bundle of coiled capture weapon. "We couldn't help her. I tried, but—" "You did the right thing." Shota shushes, settling his chin on the top of Izuku's head. "You did everything right. I'm so sorry you had to leave her, Izuku. I'm so sorry. You helped her just by finding her. We know she exists now, and because of you and Togeda, finding her and bringing her to safety is now our top priority. We'll rescue her. We'll do everything in our power to rescue her." It's like a weight lifted off of his shoulders, that Shota saying this. Shota knows what he'd done, about the patrol and the little girl and how they'd just let Shizuki take her away, and he's telling him it's okay. He knows, and he's providing targeted empathy. He's so grateful that Hisashi had managed to calm him down that even when he hadn't known what Izuku was so worked up over, he'd still just let the emotions run their course and offered his presence as comfort, but this was exactly what Izuku needed to hear. He needed someone to know what he did. He needed someone to tell him that it would work out. He clutches at his guardian for a while, long enough that Shota had sunk into a crouch, and Izuku is hanging off of his guardian with just his legs as an anchor to the couch. Shota makes no move to pull away either, his grip just as strong and comforting as Hisashi, but he knows. Izuku sniffles. "I didn't know you were supposed to be a part of the raid." Shota lets out a soft laugh, mouth buried in Izuku's curls. "I was one of the first contacted about it. Erasure is a valuable quirk to have in a raid when you don't know exact numbers or quirks of your targets. The Yakuza is dangerous, as is, and the Shie Hisaikai is even more so now that Shizuki is taking control. The quirks we do know of are dangerous, and it would already be a high priority before you and Togeda had found that girl." Izuku nods, cheek pressing against Shota's chest. "We'll save her, right? I can't let her down again. She needs help." "You can't make promises in heroics. There are too many unknowns, and there's so many ways that something could go wrong. Shota tells Izuku slowly, pulling away and catching Izuku's chin until they have eye contact. But we will try our damnedest to save that little girl, and that's a promise I can make. The day of the raid arrives faster than Izuku could have imagined. Sir Night-Eye really had made it a priority now that Eri's safety was on the line. It's an early morning of preparation. The team arrives at Night-Eye's agency, Shota, Fat Gum, Ryuku, as well as their interns and various other heroes participating. Izuku's more relieved than he'd care to admit, seeing Uraraka, Kirishima, and Asui accompanying their respective mentors, and he's glad to see the rest of Yuei's big three are there too. Izuku can see relief similar to his own and Togata-senpai's gaze when he smiles at his two friends. It's nice to know that there will be people to talk to, friends who know exactly what he's going through being a part of the same raid. He doesn't feel as isolated anymore, even if he does know more about Eri than everyone else does. Oboro is with them, standing shoulder to shoulder with Izuku throughout the briefing. The raid is set to happen in the afternoon, so there's still a couple of hours until then. The morning is spent going over the plan. The teams are getting assigned to different jobs, and if they want everything to run smoothly, everyone needs to be on top of what they're meant to be doing. After they run through the plan a few times, the students are dismissed for lunch. Izuku hates leaving and knows the adults will be talking more in depth, but a sideways look from Sir Night-Eye has him following the rest of the students out the door. Oboro promises to listen in on the conversation and keep him in the loop. Nothing interesting happens, besides more in-depth talk, and some of the other heroes question if the students are reliable enough to participate in such a consequential raid, considering 4 of 7 students are first-years who have not even a week into their work studies. By the time the actual raid arrives, everyone's ready to storm into the hideout, and Izuku's antsy to go. He is nervous and worried, and he's hopeful that they'll find the little girl in one piece. He hasn't seen any sign of the ghost children. He knows that they don't know about the raid, but it still makes him worried. Are they all right? Is Eri all right? Will there be even more ghosts, less of them? Did Chisaki do something to her after they met as a punishment for trying to escape? He hates that thought, and he hates even more that it very well could have happened. Izuku sticks close to Shota on the raid, or maybe Shota sticks close to him. He isn't really sure. His guardian isn't far behind him. Oboro hangs around too, watching the group and lingering close to Izuku in case they need the quirk. It's risky, considering Shota's here too, but Izuku will do whatever it takes to make sure that Eri is safe, even if that means throwing himself under the bus. The group moves swiftly down the hall, keeping close together and prepared for anything. Izuku's on high alert, looking around for any danger. He's so focused that he hardly notices the presence. "You came." Izuku whips his head in the direction of the small voice. He turns to see Eri, one of Eri's ghosts at least. He thinks it's the one who had talked to him, who'd hung back behind the other ghosts. Eri and Chisaki she's faded. "We knew you would. You'll help her, right?" Izuku manages a small nod, bottom lip sucked between his teeth. The ghost doesn't look well. She's nearly completely translucent. She'd been the strongest of the group, so to see her like this... He squeezes his eyes shut. He doesn't know how echoes work, how long they last, but it appears the end is near. He just hopes that she goes to a much better place than this. "What's happening to you?" Oboro asks softly, moving toward the girl. Izuku stays rooted in place, even as the team treks further down the hall. He has half a mind to follow them, but he won't abandon the little girl, ghost or not. "We fade," she explained softly, eyes downcast. "Overall's been busy, so he hasn't had the time to make any more. To do anything to us. I'm the only one now. You'll help her, won't you, Deku? You'll stop him?" "I will." Izuku croaks out under his breath. "I won't leave without you, without Eri." The ghost child nods, form flickering where she stood. The ghost winces before she's looking up at him, eyes sparkling with determination. "She's in a room," the ghost explains. "There's, traps. In the hallway, be careful. Overhaul's been worried about heroes coming, even if he doesn't act like it. She's important to him. To his work. You gotta rescue her, Deku. It hurts so much." "I'm so sorry," Izuku whispers to the child, dropping to his knees just in front of her like he'd done to Eri. "I'm sorry you're like this. I'm sorry you're fading. I won't let him do anything to Eri ever again, okay? You'll be okay." The ghost shakes her head, flickering once again. "I was just hoping to see you," the ghost says lightly, voice echoey. "Just wanted to make sure you were coming, and you did. I don't need to stay now. You'll help her. You said so." "I will," Izuku whispers, voice hoarse. It feels like he's watching this little girl die. He's never seen a ghost do this before. He hurts for her. I'll make sure that he never touches her again, okay? I promise you, you'll be the last one. She gives him a wobbly smile. He watches her. He's not sure if she's in pain as she flickers. He's not sure where she'd go or what'll happen to her when she's gone from their world. He hopes it doesn't hurt, that she'll be okay, maybe even that she'll be reunited with all the others of Ares' echoes. She fades before his eyes, almost like she blinks completely out of existence. She's there 1 second and then the next she's just gone. Izuku bites back a sob. Feeling tears trickle down his cheeks, he stares at the empty space, a hole in his heart. He's not sure he's ever hurt like this. He couldn't help them. It was silly to think that he could save the ghost echoes. He couldn't save them, but he sure as hell can save Eri. And he will. Deku. Izuku doesn't need to turn to know it's Shota who'd backtracked for him. He hears the tense worry and feels his guardian's eyes on him, watching and taking the scene in. Izuku clenches his hands where they're in his lap, staring at the spot the child had been in just seconds before. I thought I saw something. Izuku croaks out the excuse, dragging the sleeve of his costume up over his eyes to mop at the tears. Sorry, I didn't mean to fall behind, Eraserhead. It's fine, his guardian says stiffly, looking at where Izuku had been kneeled. What did you see? This place is booby-trapped. There was a panel in the wall. It flipped around, maybe motion-censored. Izuku drops his hands to the side, anger for these echoes and that little girl lit in his stomach. I think the whole hallway is. We have to be careful. Ares being held somewhere down this hall. I know it. So we need to reach the end. Shota eyes Izuku with a furrowed brow before nodding. Of course. Let's catch up with everyone else and tell them what you found. Don't fall behind again. Right. Izuku nods, glancing back at Oboro. The ghost stares at where the child had been fading completely and seemingly is lost in thought. Izuku shuffles back just enough to pinch the fabric of Oboro's Yuuei uniform and offers a sad smile before gesturing the ghost on. We have a little girl to save. Ares in the hospital for a couple of days following the raid. Izuku's been spending a lot of time at the hospital with the little girl, partly because he's concerned for her well-being and knows he's one of the familiar faces that she knows, and partly because Shota had been given temporary custody of the small girl since he's the only one they have on hand who's able to cancel out her quirk. It wasn't just Eri admitted to the hospital. Most of the heroes and students on the raid were injured or hit by quirks in Izuku's case. Shota was stitched up, but thankfully not admitted, and Izuku himself only had to spend a single night under observation due to his continuously using Eri's quirk as a means to fight well past his own physical capabilities. He's sure Shota and Hizashi had more to say about the observation than the doctors at the hospital had, but he doesn't complain or argue. He can see the worry in their eyes when he tries to assure them that he's fine, but ultimately caves for their sake. Fatgum, Kirishima, and Amajiki are all admitted overnight, and Uraraka, Asui, Hato, and Ryuku spend the rest of the day after the raid in the hospital as well. Togata-senpai spends a couple of days hospital-bound, and everyone tries to come to terms with the fact that Sir Nidai was lost during the raid. Izuku doesn't have good memories of the man, nothing like his sidekicks or Togata-senpai had with him, but he's still devastated. He really was a good hero, even if he didn't like Izuku. Izuku doesn't mind spending his time at the hospital. It's frankly better being the visitor than it is being the patient, but he'll gladly switch places with Eri if he was able to. He thinks that she looks tiny in a hospital bed, spending most of her time sleeping. They're in Eri's room now, down in the pediatric ward. Eri's asleep, considering Togata-senpai had just left with his father, and she always seems to perk up when they're both in the room. It's always a treat compared to the blankness the child usually wears. The little girl had been searching out Izuku and Togata both, seeking comfort in them. Izuku wasn't sure if it's because they're the first heroes that she'd met, or because they were the ones to reach her in the end, the ones who came through start to finish. He doesn't mind in the slightest, and is glad to provide comfort to her. Shota and Hizashi are both in the room as well. Eri had warmed up to Shota quickly, and Hizashi shortly after that. Shota was one of the faces that she saw during the raid, and he'd been the one to turn off her quirk before she could accidentally hurt anyone. She hadn't been very wary of him when she'd woken up in the hospital, but she had instantly searched Izuku out, who'd been silently waiting across the room. Hizashi's just a genuinely kind man who's also been there when she'd woken up. He hadn't been in hero costume, but he'd softened, like Izuku had remembered the man doing for him as well, when he'd first been brought back to his guardian's apartment all those months ago. Honestly, Izuku would be concerned if Eri didn't warm up to Hizashi. Izuku's sitting in the hospital chair by Eri's bed now, knees pulled up and heels supporting himself on the edge of his seat. He uses his thighs as a flat surface to write in his notebook, listening to the soft breaths of the little girl, and his guardians are chatting quietly across the room. He's half listening and half focused on analyzing some of the quirks that he'd seen during the raid. He isn't really eavesdropping on his guardians, just keeping an ear on their conversation. He doesn't even react until he's looking up in surprise as what they're talking about finally pieces into place. "I'll stay in the teacher's dorm with her." Izuku hears Shota say. They're talking quietly between them, so Izuku isn't sure if he's meant to hear, but he does. "There's more room down there, and it can't help to have the other teachers around. We'll look into something more permanent when she's a bit more comfortable with us." The teen pauses in his writing, looking up at them in surprise. "What?" Hizashi swirls around to face Izuku, eyebrows furrowed in his own surprise. "What?" Shota glances over too, frowning in silent question. Why would you and Eri stay in the teacher's dorms?" Shota blinks, taking in the question before cocking his head. "I'm her temporary guardian," the man says carefully, eyeing Izuku. "She'll be staying with me until we can arrange a more permanent guardian or until she learns to control her quirk. That's 24/7, problem child. We don't have room to house a little girl in the apartment, and all the dorms in our building are full as well." "There's room." Izuku blinks in confusion. "There's a bedroom in the apartment." There's no spare room in the apartment," Hizashi says slowly, as he and Shota share a confused look. "What are you talking about, Sunshine?" "The spare room." Izuku lets his feet slip off the chair, notebook lowering to his knees. "The one I sleep in when I stay upstairs with you guys. Eri can sleep in there, up in the apartment with you guys. Then no one has to go anywhere." "That's your room." Shota's frown deepens as he narrows his eyes at Izuku. "I don't think so, problem child." "It's a spare room," Izuku insists, flipping his book closed and leaning forward anxiously. "I rarely even sleep up there. I can take my stuff out and bring it down to my dorm, and it'll be just another spare room, right? There's no reason I need to have 2 rooms, is there? She needs a room, and Shota shouldn't have to leave his own apartment, and I know the class would greatly prefer knowing you're upstairs." "That's your space, though, Sunshine." Hizashi's tone is cautious, like he's talking to a spooked animal or something. Shota and Hizashi share another look that Izuku doesn't bother trying to decipher, and he feels Obero's gaze on him from across the room where the ghost had been quietly observing. Izuku doesn't understand. This seems like the most logical course of action. There's a room in the apartment that's hardly ever used. Why wouldn't they move Eri in when she needs the space? "I don't need it, though," Izuku counters logically. "I don't even need to spend time upstairs. I have everything that I need in the dorms downstairs, and it makes sense that I just stay downstairs with my classmates when someone else needs the room more than I do, right? It's a guest room." "It's your room, not a guest room," Shota replies lowly, not unkindly. "It's yours. It was added into the layout of the building with you specifically in mind. That room in that apartment is yours, and we're not going to take that away just because someone else could use it." "But I don't mind." Izuku frowns now. Why aren't they just agreeing? If he took his stuff out of the room, it would just be a spare, right? It's not like he needs to be up in the apartment with his guardians, not like how Eri needs to be close to Shota right now. She obviously needs them. Shouldn't that be a priority? "Just because you don't mind giving up your room doesn't mean it's right for us to ask that of you," Hizashi tells him softly. "It's your room, your space. The apartment's your home, too. We like knowing that there's somewhere for you to stay. Your own space just for you, when you're up in the apartment." "But Eri needs somewhere to stay," Izuku tells them. And I don't want to put Shota out when there's a perfectly good bedroom in the apartment. We all like knowing that he's upstairs when we need him, especially after everything. The class shouldn't have to suffer because I'm being greedy with the room. Plus, I sleep in my dorm most of the time. Eri needs the space, and I don't mind. Isn't that the most logical thing to do?" "You're not really seeing where they're coming from," Obero comments lightly from across the room. And a quick glance over tells him that the ghost looks unimpressed. It's that look he always gets when something his guardians are saying or doing goes straight over his head, when he doesn't understand something that everyone else seems to get. "It's not greedy." Shota sighs heavily. "It's your space, problem child. We understand that you don't mind offering up your room for Eri to borrow, but we aren't going to take something that's yours away from you, even if it seems logical to you. And you know how much I like logic, so understand that doing that wouldn't be logical to us. We won't be taking your room away from you so that Eri can use it. It's yours." A "why" sits on the tip of Izuku's tongue, but he feels like this is a losing battle. They're insistent, and the more that he keeps pushing and assuring that he doesn't mind, and he really doesn't, the more it seems like his guardians are getting upset, and he doesn't understand. He hardly ever uses the room, and none of his peers have a second room on school grounds. It's not like anyone else besides Hitoshi even has the luxury of seeing their guardians and family on a day-to-day basis. Izuku's lucky that his guardians live above the dorms, that there's a place for him to go. Still, if he's not using the room very often, and Eri could be using it, wouldn't it make more sense just to let her have it? No one will be put out, Shota wouldn't have to sleep in the teachers' dorms, and Eri would have a safe space to sleep. It's not like she's taking his bed, and even if she were, he'd gladly give it up. We're not going to take something that's yours away from you for an indefinite amount of time, Shota explains easily when Izuku doesn't say anything else. That doesn't sit right with either of us, and we're not going to take it from you just because it sounds like it's the easiest. I know you say you don't mind, and I believe you, but it's not something that either Hisashi or I think is fair, or are comfortable doing. Your room is your space. Eri needs somewhere to stay, her own space, but it shouldn't have to be your space. Izuku bites his bottom lip, accepting defeat. It doesn't feel like he'll be getting anywhere with this. It still doesn't feel right, though. We'll figure something out. It doesn't involve you giving up your room and your home away from home. Hisashi strolls across the room, ruffling his fingers through Izuku's curls when he gets close enough to do so. We spend a lot of time up there, and Sho and I like that you get a break from your dorm just like everyone else, even if we can't always go home or to the off-campus apartment, you dig? What about Eri? Izuku asks, eyes flicking away from Hisashi and toward the child. She's still asleep, and if anyone deserves to sleep to their heart's content, it's Eri. We'll figure something out, problem child. Shota echoes Hisashi's own words gently, his eyes flickering toward the little girl, too. We'll figure something out that works for everyone. No one's going to be stepping on anyone's toes. There are always ways to go about this without anyone having to give up anything. Just let Hisashi and I sort this out, okay? Okay. Izuku nods slowly. He tears his gaze away from the sleeping girl and looks between his guardians. Eri is the last person discharged from the hospital. She's released into Shota's care a couple of days after Togata's released. She was in the hospital for a little under a week, fighting malnutrition, dehydration, quirk exhaustion, and regular exhaustion as well. Over the week, she went through extensive screenings and medical testing to determine her health after being in the hands of a villain for so long, and was healed by a couple of different quirks, but there was a lot of damage done to the poor thing. Her scars are proof of that. They may never know just what Shizuki did to the little girl, but everyone can agree that it had to have been horrific. Doctors and specialists had all agreed that what Eri had been through was traumatic, and that the physical scars were just the tip of the iceberg into that trauma. Izuku seems insistent of that as well, well before the doctors had determined just what Eri had been through. From the start, he'd seemed too in tune with Eri's needs and comfort. They'd known him long enough to know that he's genuinely kind and an empathetic kid, but this seems a bit too personal. They'd very quickly bonded, maybe even past how Togata had bonded with the little girl. Eri was definitely quite fond of Togata, but she seemed different with Izuku. There was just something about how Izuku spoke to the girl, seemed to know exactly how to calm her. It was like he was always 2 steps ahead of everyone else when it came to Eri, and Shota wasn't sure why. It was nice to see, adorable even, but it was also odd. Even when Eri was released from the hospital, she'd been ecstatic to find both Izuku and Togata waiting with Hisashi. She'd instantly run toward Izuku, and he's been quick to pick her up and twirl her into a hug. She'd been so happy, the happiest little girl had ever appeared to be in the time that she'd been in the hospital, even if she hadn't cracked a single smile to see both of them. It was clear how excited she was to see both, going on about Lemillion and Deku, but it was obvious she wanted to be close to Izuku. Shota understood this. The 2 teens clearly provided a little bit of familiarity. He knows Izuku had been the first to really interact with the child, and it was a common thing when it came to victims and heroes that saved them, especially children rescued from environments like a Yakuza home base, and Eri was just a child, and Izuku and Togata were the 2 people who came through and saved her. The little girl had slowly warmed up to him as well, though, and Hisashi to a degree as well, but in her time at the hospital, it was obvious that the child had taken an immediate liking to the 2 teens, and they've clearly taken a liking to the girl, too. Shota had been spending his time at the hospital, keeping an eye on her and watching over her in case that she accidentally started using her quirk. No one blamed the small child for a lack of quirk control, but it was better to have an erasure quirk on hand to make sure that nothing got out of hand. Eri had only lost control of her quirk twice in the whole hospital stay, but she'd managed to rewind a doctor a year or so back, and the second time, Shota had cut it off before any damage could be done. Shota had been near constantly with the little girl, while Hisashi had been watching over 1A and bringing Izuku in to visit. After Togata was released from the hospital, he too could be found hovering with their foster son. It was Rare to see Hisashi arrive at the hospital with just Izuku, and even rarer to see his husband coming alone without the two teens. Eri spends most of her time sleeping, which is good. She'd greatly overused her quirk, which she'd constantly used it when she was healing Izuku, and the teen had been fighting Chisaki. Shota's almost glad he hadn't been there to see that in its entirety, because he's almost certain that he would have tried to erase someone's quirk, and that, well, erasing anyone's but Chisaki's could have been dangerous, considering how the teen and the child were feeding off each other's quirks. One wrong move, and Izuku and Eri could have been plummeted from the sky, or Rewind could have gotten out of hand, and rewound Izuku far too far back, when her energy wasn't being channeled into something. It's been just a couple of days since Eri was released from the hospital. A lot of the students are still at their internships, some even spending the full duration of their internships in other towns or living with hosts, so it's not too hard to introduce Eri to the dorms. Normally he'd be worried about overstimulating her with all the rowdy students, but the only ones actually in the dorms full-time right now are the students who were part of the raid, which for the most part are people that Eri has at least seen on the scene of her rescue. The students who were part of the raid had been given some time to recuperate, which Shota's grateful for, since he couldn't even imagine expecting these children to be okay to just return to their internships after an intensive raid and a rescue mission. Their first real missions, mind you. A raid that not a single person returned from unscathed, heroes and students alike, a raid that a pro-hero had died in. There's been talk of bringing the first portion of the internships to an end for now, and Shota couldn't agree more with the notion. He just wants all the kids back safe and sound right now. There'll be more internships, but there's a lot he wants to teach them before that. He's proud of how the students had acted and reacted during their raids, and there's still much more to teach. For now, he's just glad to have those who had been a part of it safe in their dorms. The man lets out a sigh, leaning back in his chair. They're in the teachers' dorms, and Shota's trying to get some work done. Eri's on the couch in their common area. The television turned to a children's show that Izuku introduced her to in the days since she'd been released from the hospital. The small girl had been completely enthralled by the program, and since Shota has work that he can be doing, he'd decided to let her enjoy herself. He's not alone. Nomuri and Hisashi are here with him, and 13 is sitting on the couch behind Eri, watching along too. His guardianship over Eri had been going well. She hadn't had any quirk accidents, terrified to use her quirk at all. It's amazing that her control hadn't slipped at all since she'd been released. It's stressful and a new setting for her, usually things that tend to set children spiraling, and he hasn't pushed on the topic of her quirk, not yet at least. Izuku had taken to the small girl even more than Shota and Hisashi had assumed he would. He'd accepted the role of older sibling without much thought, and Eri had followed suit. She's taken to calling him Tsukuni. In the days they'd known each other, it had been Dekuni at first, but Hisashi had been quick to correct her. Hisashi really does hate the hero named Deku. They hadn't managed to find a sleeping arrangement that worked in favor for everyone. Izuku had brought up the interesting point that 1A liked having Shota in the building with them, and he can't even complain because he's most at ease when he knows all 20 of his kids are safe downstairs. That said, he and Hisashi also hadn't caved on the bedroom dispute. It was upsetting how fast Izuku was willing to give up his room when he deemed someone else was more worthy. Shota had thought that they were making progress with the kid, but maybe they hadn't made as much as he originally thought. It doesn't sit right with him that Izuku's always so willing to make someone else comfortable, even at the cost of his own comfort. Izuku and Eri had ended up sleeping in the living room in the apartment, usually with Shota crashing on the couch behind them. They'd laid out a futon that Hisashi had thought to grab from the off-campus apartment on their way in from the hospital, and Izuku had been more than happy to hang around the little girl. It had worked, but Shota knows that they can't keep sleeping on the floor in the living room, and if no one can compromise about staying in the teachers' dorms or letting Eri have Izuku's room in the apartment, he's not sure what's going to happen. He isn't even sure if this is healthy for Izuku. He hadn't been pulling away exactly, but he had been distancing himself when he thinks Eri should have their full attention. They'd just gotten Izuku accustomed to the idea of having attentive guardians, and now he's stepping away from the idea because Eri obviously also needs a guardian. Shota hates it. This is what he didn't want to happen, why he'd been hesitant about taking on the role of caretaker for the little girl, and Izuku just isn't at a place where he knows how to accept sharing attention. His go-to is to hand over everything when he thinks that someone else needs it more, in this case, stepping back from his guardians because he believes that Eri needs them more than he does. "Why are you so glary?" A finger's pointed in his direction, to the side of his head, and Nomuri's curious purr had him turning his glare in her direction. "Thinking about your son again, or your ward?" Shota glances over at where Eri is still staring wide-eyed at the television. 13 now just looks confused as the show progresses. "I'm not glaring," Shota huffs, glaring at his friend. "And it's none of your business." We're worried, Hizashi says quietly. About Izuku. About Izuku? Why? Namuri blinks in surprise, leaning back in her chair so she can see Eri. The little girl bounces where she's sitting as an upbeat theme song plays. How many episodes has she watched now? Green Bean not liking sharing the attention of Dad and Dad. I never pegged the kid as a jealous type. It's actually the opposite, really. Hizashi sighs, rubbing at the back of his neck. He's, I don't know, withdrawing himself? He loves Eri, don't get me wrong, but he's sort of distancing himself from us because he thinks that we should be focusing on her more. We're worried. He's sensitive. Shota sighs, figuring there's no easy way out of this conversation that Hizashi had just gotten them into. After his mother, I think he believes himself to be the disposable one, that we'll get tired of him or replace him. He's always tried to keep himself at arm's length, but recently he's been making progress, I suppose. Yeah, Hizashi agrees with a soft look. I know he doesn't think that we're replacing him, but subconsciously, I don't know. His mom really messed with his head. He's gotten comfortable, but I think he's seeing us interact with Eri, or needing us to. I think he's going to pull away so he doesn't get in the way. That's not good, Namuri frowns, and Shota's glad to see the tease has left her tone and expression. Have you guys tried talking to him? The we love you and nothing will ever change that, not even a new baby stuff? He's our baby, Hizashi huffs. Nothing will change that. My point exactly, Namuri deadpans with a fond smile. It's adorable how weak for that kid you two are. He's really part of the family now, huh? My legit nephew. I mean, I teased him about it when I came around your place for Shirakumo's birthday, but I really am Auntie Nem now, aren't I? He is. Shota doesn't bother trying to say anything else. He just hasn't come to the same conclusion yet, and I doubt he will if he keeps pulling away because he thinks that we're going to replace him with Eri. And don't make him call you that. You'll embarrass him. We're trying to bring him out of his shell, not shove him back in. Don't move too fast. And you don't get to be Auntie Nem until we're Dad and Pa. I refuse. It'd be like our baby saying Mama first when he's got two gay dads. Totally uncool. Hizashi pouts, arms crossing over his chest. Hizashi, Shota warns dryly. He'll come around when he's ready. Stop pouting. You know he's skittish. You're still riding the high of him calling you Pa in the hospital while he was drugged. He doesn't remember that. It was still adorable, and I'll never forget it. Hizashi slumps in his seat, defeated. I wish I would have been recording. I'll literally die when he calls me Pa again. I can't wait to be that for him. I know how parents feel when their babies first start talking now. I bet he'll call me Pa again before he calls you Dad, Sho. I don't know. Namuri shakes her head. Shota's the homeroom teacher. I've heard some of the other 1A kids calling him Dad Zawa. They call me what? So it feels like he'll slip up and call him Dad at some point. Shota stares exasperated between his husband and friend. No one's betting on Izuku. He'll call us whatever he feels comfortable with. Both of you are unbearable. Can we get back to the matter of hand? Our kid literally convincing himself that someone else needs us more than he thinks he does, so the best thing for him to do is to remove himself from the situation? Shota pauses, looking between the two, who look like they're scolded puppies. He rubs at his eyes and sighs. And how does it always feel like we're back in high school whenever you two are together? That, Namuri is pointing to Shota with an impressed expression, is totally why the Green Bean will call him Dad first. Hizashi pouts, but doesn't refute. Shota doesn't know if he should take that as a win or a loss. I get what you guys are saying, though. Namuri's tone is serious once again. Conversation back on the rails. Midori's never struck me as a confident kid. I mean, we all saw him during the entrance exam, willing to break his own body for Uraraka's sake. He's got, no self-preservation skills. So it's no surprise that branches out to his home life, too. I mean, you're probably right. He wouldn't do well with a sibling, as much as he adores Eri. I mean, it isn't just Izuku either. I don't even know if we can handle another kid. Hizashi looks toward the ceiling. We're already so busy, and truthfully, I don't even know if we're giving Izuku the attention that he needs. Eri's still so young, and between all our jobs, Shota working nights a lot of the time, and Izuku, I just don't think it'll fall into place, you dig? Children require a lot, Shota agrees, biting his bottom lip. I have 1A to be dealing with, and I know Eri was placed with me because of her quirk, but I just don't know if I'll have the time to really be a parent to her. Not like she'll need. Hizashi's right, we are busy. Izuku's a teenager, and there's still times that we don't see him besides class. That's no way for a child to live, and until Izuku's in a good place, a place where he knows that he's important to us, I don't think that we should be doing anything that could deter his own progress. I agree, Hizashi says softly, like he doesn't want to admit it. Ari's a wonderful little girl, but we need to put Izuku first, and I don't want him pulling away from us. He's finally getting comfortable with us. I don't want to ruin it. Shota dry washes his face with his hands, sighing into his palms. You know, I've taken a step back from my agency, Namuri says without looking up. I've been thinking about putting my own fostering license to good use, and since we're moved into the dorms, I've had a lot of spare time, plus there's a spare bedroom in my apartment in the Gen Ed class. And, Shota drawls, lifting his face from his hands and arching an eyebrow. The woman slaps him on the shoulder. You know exactly what I'm getting at, Shota. The little munchkin's adorable. She needs somewhere to be, and I have the space and time. Plus, it's only a 5-minute walk from my dorms to yours, so if something did happen, a quirk accident or something, you could be there in minutes, and she'll still be close to Togeda and the green bean for them to spoil. Does that check all the boxes? You're really serious about fostering? Hisashi cocks his head to the side. Namuri had gotten her license around the time that they did, but she never really used it. No more than Shota and Hisashi did when something had arose at school, not like when they'd gotten and fallen in love with Izuku. Namuri had been a good foster parent, but nothing had stuck, and she liked her freedom when she was younger. What about your wild love life? Shota asked slowly. I live on a school campus, Namuri deadpans, arms crossing over her chest. My love life isn't exactly flourishing at the moment, and it's not like having a kid is a prison sentence. I'll still be able to get out sometimes. She'll have 2 uncles who'll love to babysit, and a cousin who adores her, not to mention the rest of the students who've taken a shine to her already, like Togeda. I think I'd be able to find someone to babysit every so often when the need arises, if you catch my drift. Gross. Shota scrunches his face up. Hisashi snorts a laugh into his fist. Still, Shota can't argue with Namuri's logic on this one. It does check all the boxes. If you're still sure about this, we'll need to talk with Nezu first, and we'll need to officially transfer her from my care to yours. I don't mind being her secondary guardian still. I need to put my kid first before thinking of another. You're adorable, Shota, Namuri coos, leaning forward to throw an arm over his shoulder. He thinks for a second about ducking out of it, but then he'd be risking getting tackled. I'm sure about this. We'll jump through whatever hoops, right? I've always wanted kids, you know? I've wanted kids, and there's one that needs a home. And it's better for everyone if she's close, so I think it's a no-brainer. Shota thinks it over for just one more second before bowing his head in a nod. All right. All right, everyone. This concludes Chapter 39 of Yuuei Survival Guide. Chapter 40 will be next. Hope y'all are still enjoying this one, and as always, thank you so much for listening.